Well, finally back to the dining room table project after a little over a month off to do the museum shelving project. The next step is going to be cutting the leg blanks to the exact length and then putting mortises in there for the rails. And yesterday I did work on making a jig to cut the mortises with the router, which I'll show you a little later in close, but basically it's pockets cut into the top of the legs for where the rails meet the legs. So we'll get started. I kind of reviewed the drawings yesterday, familiarized myself with where we were, and I've labeled, you can see here by the drawing, there's two mortises that come in from either side and they're offset, so it requires two different jig setups to cut those. So I've gone through and labeled those around here so that I know for sure. I'll put a mark on the face for that number, and that assures I won't make a mistake. And as we get cutting the mortises, this will make more sense. So here's the mortises, and as I showed you earlier, it's basically a pocket cut in the top of the legs that will receive the tenon from each rail. It provides a lot of long grain glue area, and there's also naturally mechanical strength in the joint. But these joints, this mortise has to be cut very accurately, otherwise it throws off the rest of the joinery. So the goal is to cut a mortise that is 7/8 of an inch wide, 2 1/4 inch this way, and 1 1/4 inch deep. And it has to be located 9/16 from the top of the leg and 9/16 in from the side. So to consistently cut those, you need to make a jig, which I made yesterday, that is a template and indexes on the leg to assure that the router is guided to cut the mortise in the right spot. What I'm using is a plunge cutting router with a 1/2 inch spiral cutting bit and a template bushing that follows in, this is probably offset about 100 thousandths. So in designing the jig, it has to be bigger than the actual mortise that you want, but it needs to be perfectly located. So that's going to be the process. And I mentioned that there's 1s and 2s. What you can see here is the jig is set up to index off the top of the leg and the front face or the outside edge of the leg. And in this case, that will line up perfectly with 1. But to do 2, I'm going to have to flip the jig around and have a stop block there. So I'll cut all the 1s first, and then I'll cut the 2s second. I'm utilizing the bench device as a handy clamp to clamp the workpiece and the jig to the workpiece. I've just made a little shim here that holds the leg up above the surface of the vise, and then the jig indexes on the top and front edge or the outside edge. So as long as the leg is all the way up tight against that stop and you pull the vise down, that means it's located in the right spot, and the bushing, guide bushing on the router can follow that. And you can only take a certain amount of depth at one time without overloading the bit in the router. You can see here, I've just removed barely a 1/4 inch of depth. So to remove the full 1 1/4 inch takes quite a bit of material. So this is where removing the waste with the drill press will certainly speed the process along. Set up here in the drill press with a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, which is an 1/8 inch less than the width of the mortise, and I can remove the bulk of the material and save quite a bit of work for the router and the Now that I've got all the number 1 side mortises cut, I'm going to go through and check their depth, their width, both ways, and make sure everything matches before I reconfigure the jig to cut side 2, because now is the easiest. If I need to recut one, I can do it. I'm reconfiguring the jig by removing the stop block from this side and moving it here to be able to index and cut the number 2 mortise. I've just got to be 17/32 exactly from the edge. Now that I've made the test cut, I had to make one more adjustment, move it in about 20 thousandths, but now I was able to obtain exactly the right measurement. So this matches the other side. So the mortise is located top to bottom exactly. So now I can go ahead and repeat the process for all the number 2 mortises. Now to the drill press to remove the waste. Now that all the mortises are cut, you can see that the 2 mortises coming in from each side do actually intersect. So there is a little opening there. So the end of the tenon that I put in will just have a slight bevel on it so they don't interfere. But there's the last ones we cut and the first ones we cut. But all those legs, this is my test leg, a spare leg in case there's a problem, and then the 4 labeled legs. Next step is to take a 3/16 radius roundover bit and round over the edges of the legs. And I tried an 1/8 inch, it's just not enough. So the 3/16 will be the right amount. So I need to change out the bit and run. Now the legs are all rounded over. The bit did a really nice job of smoothly rounding over the edges without burning or chipping out. I'd had my friend Dan at Sharpite in West Salem, Wisconsin, sharpen a bunch of saw blades and bits for me. That's one of the first ones I've gotten the opportunity to use, and it works as good or better than new. And that is really key to get a good setup, the right speed on the router and the right feed speed.